Hey there. So last time I was reading The Magic Treehouse, the second book, I didn't realize that this was not the last page in chapter 4. There's a couple more pages, so we're going to finish chapter 4 and then read 5 and 6. I read this page already, so at the last paragraph it says, "Laughter and music came from a bright room in front of them. They stood at the doorway and peeked in." "The feast in the great hall," whispered Jack. He held his breath as he stared in awe. A giant fireplace blazed at one end of the noisy room. Antlers and rugs hung on the stone walls. Flowers covered the floor. People in bright clothes and funny hats strolled among the crowd. Some played oddly shaped guitars. Some juggled balls in the air. Some balanced swords on their heads. Boys in short dresses carried huge trays of food. Dogs were fighting over bones under the tables. Men and women dressed in capes and furs sat at long, crowded wooden tables. "I wonder which one is the knight," said Jack. "I don't know," whispered Annie. "But look, they're all eating with their fingers." "Halt!" someone shouted from behind them. Jack whirled around. A man carrying a tray of pies was standing a few feet away. "Who art thou?" he asked angrily. "Jack!" squeaked Annie. "Annie!" squeaked Annie. Then they ran as fast as they could down a dimly lit hallway. Chapter 5. Trapped. "Come on!" cried Annie. "Hurry!" Jack raced behind her. "Here, quick!" Annie dashed toward a door off the hallway. She pushed the door open. Jack and Annie stumbled into a dark, cold room. The door creaked shut behind them. "Give me the flashlight," said Annie. Jack handed it to her, and she switched it on. "Yikes," said Annie. A row of knights was right in front of them. Annie flicked off the light. Silence. "They aren't moving," Jack whispered. Annie switched the light back on. "They're just suits," Jack said. "Without heads," said Annie. "Let me have the flashlight for a second," said Jack, "so I can look in the book." Annie handed Jack the flashlight. He pulled out the castle book. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. Jack put the book away. "It's called the Armory," he said. "It's where armor and weapons are stored." He shined the flashlight around the room. "Oh, man," whispered Jack. The light fell on shiny breastplates, leg plates, and arm plates. Shelves were filled with helmets and weapons. Shields, spears, swords, crossbows, clubs, and battle axes hung on the walls. Voices came from the hallway. "Let's hide," said Annie. "Wait," said Jack. "I've got to check on something first." "Hurry," said Annie. "It'll just take a second," said Jack. "Hold this." He handed Annie the flashlight. He tried to lift a helmet from a shelf. It was too heavy. He bent down and dragged the helmet over his head. The visor slammed shut. "Oh man," thought Jack, "this is worse than having a 5-year-old on my head. It's like having a 10-year-old on my head." Not only could Jack not lift his head, he couldn't see anything either. "Jack!" Annie sounded far away. "They're getting closer." "Turn off the flashlight," Jack's voice echoed inside the metal helmet. He struggled to get the helmet off. Suddenly, he lost his balance and went crashing into other pieces of armor. Metal plates and weapons clattered to the floor. Jack lay on the floor in the dark. He tried to get up. But his head was too heavy. He heard deep voices. Someone grabbed him by the arm. The next thing he knew, his helmet was yanked off. He was staring into the fiery light of a torch. Chapter 6. Ta-da! In the torchlight, Jack saw 3 huge men standing over him. One with very squinty eyes held the torch. One with a very red face held Jack. And one with a very long mustache held on to Annie. Annie was kicking and yelling. "Stop!" said the one with the very long mustache. "Who art thou?" said the one with the very red face. "Spies, foreigners, Egyptians, Romans, Persians," said the squinty-eyed one. "No, you dummies," said Annie. "Oh, brother," Jack muttered. "Arrest them," said Redface. "The dungeon," said Squinty Eyes. The guards marched Jack and Annie out of the armory. "Go," said a guard, giving him a push. Jack went. Squinty, Annie, Mustache Jack, and Red marched down the long, dark hallway. They marched down a narrow, winding staircase. Jack heard Annie shouting at the guards, "Meanies, we didn't do anything!" The guards laughed. At the bottom of the stairs was a big iron door with a bar across it. Squinty lifted the bar. He shoved the door, and it creaked open. Mustache and Red pushed Jack and Annie into a cold, clammy room. The fiery torch lit the dungeon. There were chains hanging from the filthy walls. Water dripped from the ceiling, making puddles on the stone floor. It was the creepiest place Jack had ever seen. "We'll keep them here till the feast is done, then turn them over to the Duke," said Squinty. "He knows how to take care of thieves." "There will be a hanging tomorrow," said Mustache. "If the rats don't get them first," said Red. They all laughed. Jack felt his backpack move. Annie was quietly opening it. "Come on, let's chain the two of them," said Squinty. The guards started toward Annie and Jack. Annie whipped her flashlight out of Jack's pack. "Ta-da!" she yelled. Oops. The guards froze. They stared at the shiny flashlight in Annie's hand. Annie switched on the light. The guards gasped. They jumped back against the wall. Squinty dropped the torch. It fell into a dirty puddle on the floor, sputtered, and went out. "My magic wand," Annie said, waving the flashlight. "Get down, or I'll wipe you out." Jack's mouth dropped open. Annie fiercely pointed her light at Squinty, then at Mustache, and then at Red. Each howled and covered his face. "Down, all of you! Get down!" shouted Annie. One by one, the guards knelt down on the wet floor. Jack couldn't believe it. "Come on," whispered Annie to Jack. "Let's go now." Jack looked at the open doorway. He looked at the guards, quaking on the ground. "Hurry," said Annie. In one quick leap, Jack followed Annie out of the terrible dungeon. Okay, more next time. See you then.